Welcome to In This Moment. I'm Janet Stovall, DEI strategist, joined by organizational culture expert Khalil Smith. We tackle the urgent questions in management and inclusion, exploring what's next and what you can do about it today. We're so glad you're here with us. Let's dive in.
So, Julie, welcome to the In This Moment podcast. Super excited to have this conversation with you. Let's start with the future. So let's start with what's next. When you look ahead to the next kind of 18 to 24 months, what are the biggest shifts that organizations need to prepare for when it comes to allyship and inclusion?
Well, one of the things that we have realized with all of this tremendous unnecessary backlash is people with power were not really engaged in this work, not in an active way, more in a performative way. It was something that came as a business opportunity in the summer of 2020. We all know what happened. And so, what I think in the next year, 2 years, is that we need to re engage folks with power. They are waiting for an invitation. Inclusion work never felt like it included them, it always felt exclusionary, which is obviously problematic and ironic. But we really need to engage them.
And Julie, was there something about the work inherently that made it feel exclusionary to them? Like, what is the thing that needs to change over that period in order for us to not repeat the same challenges, mistakes, errors, whatever we would call them, so that 24 months from now we are in a significantly better place?
Yeah, so I did a bunch of research. So after the election, I was just completely shell shocked. And
You're like, let me understand this. Let me try to get my head wrapped around it.
Like, what
Done.
happened?
We're here again. And so I talked with over 50 people, C-suite leaders, DEI people, just, hey, what happened and what is it going to take for us to move this work forward? And what I found is one of the big problems with our work is there was a lot of fear. And the fear that white men in particularly felt about DEI was, this isn't for me. All risk, no reward. Status threat. I stand to lose something by engaging and rooting against myself, is what a lot of really well-intentioned allies told me. And even were given mixed messages about, hey, you're not going to get hired, you're not going to get promoted because you are a white man. These were things that people didn't write in emails or publicly say, but in hallway conversations, this was the message that they were receiving, that when we are investing in DEI, that means you are getting divested in. And that's just not true. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not I win, you lose. You hire a black woman doesn't mean you demote a white man. But unfortunately, that was what people thought that DEI was. And so we have a branding problem. We have a repackaging problem that needs to be done. I used to work in consumer packaged goods, and from time to time, not that DEI is a packaged good, but it reminds me of what we would do every few years. We would rebrand, we would redo the packaging, and that's where we're at with DEI. Will the acronym stand the test of time? Probably not. So you pull out the I, the B, the culture, belong. It doesn't really matter what we call it. It's the words don't matter. It's the work that does.
So, is it possible, Julie, that this feeling of being left out, is it actually being left out, or is it the experience of sharing a space for the first time rather than dominating it? I mean,
Right. Is it real? Is
you
it
knew I was going.
imagined?
You knew I was
What are
going
we
there, right?
solving for? Does the package good actually need to change, or are we just changing the wrapper around it, but people actually like what it tastes like?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but like I
yeah,
said, now that they're not centered, those same people are not centered in the conversations, not them. So is that what, just like you say, they think it's a zero sum game because if somebody wins, they lose. But by the same token, with that feeling, is being left out simply that you're not the center of the conversation. You're sharing the space for the first time.
yeah, so true. So a lot of the fears are very unreal. And that's just to be clear, I do not believe these things, but I was told these things by so many people that there's a perception problem.
Well, and Julie, to your point, when people tell us something, we've been saying for years, listen, right? And so whether it's real or not, if folks are telling you this, we have to listen and understand. Doesn't mean we need to agree, but we need to understand and figure out where we navigate from there. So that's what I love about what you're saying, but please continue.
Yeah, yeah. And the third time I heard the story of I wasn't going to get promoted because I'm a white man, I was like, oh, shit, there was some stuff that happened. I was not a part of that work, but there was some not great work that was done. And so this whole centering thing, and I talk about centering in my new book, is when you're so used to being the center, being decentered somehow is very jarring to you. I open up with an analogy about a fish swimming in the, and y'all probably know this one, right? You don't know the water you're swimming in until you get the context outside of the bowl to be like, oh, wow, that water was weird. There are different currents and temperatures for different people. But if you're swimming in comfortable water with the current, why would you think it's not working for other people if it's working great for you? And this is the disconnect that we're at. And as much as we did privilege walks, all sorts of exercises to help people see that, sometimes it worked, but a lot of times it actually created like a backlash effect of like, great, now I'm terrible. I have all this shame and I'm being blamed for it. Not that that was our intention. I never intended to do that as a practitioner, but I did get that feedback, especially if you just do that and then go away. And so much DEI training was one and done, check the box, unconscious bias training. We know that that does not work. That is the only negative information about DEI that is actually factual when you do one-time training, especially around a polarizing topic like bias. It is ineffective and usually makes things worse, not better. So we just need to rethink, like, what are the strategies? What are the tools that really work?
Yeah, good point. And it's interesting you said that. I'm listening to an audiobook and it's Toni Morrison's only short story. And there's a section there, and I know I'm going to say this wrong, but she wrote this book years ago. And it's so real now, because one of the things she says is that, people sometimes push back against history and other people's issues. And what we don't realize is that, especially when you talk about racial issues, we define your definition, whoever you are, would not be valid without the definition of the other group. We are that's how we define ourselves. So when people push back and say, we don't, history makes us uncomfortable, whatever, what they're not understanding is that history is not the history that you're afraid of, is still your history. And you talk about, Killer, you mentioned listen to people. We always say, as members of marginalized groups, you need to understand my experience. But you don't just need to understand it because it's my experience. You need to understand it because your experience is defined by the experience I have, whether you want to believe that or not. And so I think that's really important when we talk about pulling people in.
Yeah. Yeah. What you're highlighting, Janet, is a lived experience gap. And we cannot fully understand the experiences we have not had ourselves. You can empathize, you can try to understand, but I will never know what it's like to have black or brown skin. It's not possible for me to walk around in a black or brown body.
Right.
So, Julie, with that in mind, what do you recommend for how you prepare the middle managers, the executives, the ones that seem to be the people with power and resources but are struggling with a lot of this? How do you prepare them for what is coming?
Yeah. Well, lead with data. Data is our friend in this. So, a few key stats that most people are painfully, totally unaware about is we know that the census in 2045 looks very different than it does, right? And that's very scary and polarizing to certain individuals that see this as a zero sum game. But what we don't talk a lot about is that actually happens in the workforce much sooner. So by 2030, the majority of the workforce will be younger generations. And Gen Z, if you just look at Gen Z and how they've already replaced the baby boomers and will be very equivalent to the size of millennials in a few years, no majority race, 31% identifies LGBTQ plus, 1 in 5 are neurodivergent, many just awareness of social issues. They grew up in the height of immigration, of Black Lives Matter, of the Me Too movement. So all of these forces that are coming into the workforce, this is going to be your employee base. These are going to be the people you're managing. You can't take the diversity out of them. And so I think for managers, it's helping them understand that your workforce will be different in just a few years' time. Do you want to be proactive or do you want to be reactive? Because those that are being proactive are going to stand the test of time. They will be more relevant. So it just becomes a question about relevance. Do you want to be relevant to future consumers, community members, and future potential employees? Or do you want to be irrelevant? Most
Well,
people
when you
do
put
not.
it that way, Julie, it feels like there's only one right answer.
It is one of the biggest shame triggers. Brene Brown studied this, is the fear of irrelevance. And so you are very relevant in this conversation. If those statistics scare you, let's unpack that. What's behind that fear? What's real about that? Why do we need you? And why will you personally benefit from helping others? One of the statistics I think is just wonderful to share is that Harvard did their longest study on happiness since like the 1940s. What have they found as the most highly correlated variable with human happiness? The quality of your relationships. And so, if you want to be happy, which I think, again, most humans want, then try some allyship. Try being helpful and in community with others. And the biggest benefit of spending time with people and supporting others that are different from you is that you learn, you grow as a human being. You're happier, you feel more fulfilled, you feel valued. And there's a huge chapter 3 in the new book is all about what's in it for me. There's a big whiffum for people with power, and we're just not thinking about it that way. Hoarding your power, keeping your power, I think feels maybe safer.
That's exactly the word that came to mind. Yeah.
Is it though? Is it like, are those people really happy?
I think there's a sense of control, right? There's a sense of like, I get to control. And part of what I hear you saying is you can also, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but control your relevance as you move forward. And so do you get relegated to a space where you don't understand your employees, where you're trying to hold on and grasp power, where you're trying to kind of keep people down and not let them talk to one another and not, kind of hold everybody in their individual spaces? Or do you get to evolve and decide how you're going to continue to be relevant far into the future? But I think in so many instances, work has been at times about kind of the command and control and how do I hold on to power, and if anybody else is making decisions, that means I'm not. And to Janet's point about who's centered in the conversation, if not everyone is coming to me or looking to me, well then what does that mean? Am I now replaceable? Am I not as important as I was before? And all of those things drive at what both of you have been talking about, which is fear, right? This fear of what's going to happen. I've reached a certain pinnacle, but if I'm not the go-to person anymore, what do I do when that happens? And not addressing that, not understanding it. And Julie, as you've been talking about, not listening to the people that are saying, I'm afraid, right? Regardless of how they may be saying it or how they may be acting about it, part of what we're hearing is that I'm afraid. And I feel like part of what I hear you saying is we need to listen differently. And I also, Janet, you're the one's like, but don't forget, these are some of the people with power. And so that doesn't excuse them from the obligation and the responsibility, and you don't get to cower in the corner and just say, I'm afraid, so I'm going to take my ball and go home. But it's okay to say, I'm afraid, so how do we do this together?
Well, and to your point, I'm sorry, Julie, go ahead.
I was just going to build off of that. They're waiting for an invitation. So they were playing ball and took their ball home, kind of like the kid that gets mad, like, I'm not going to play with you anymore. It's kind of childish behavior if you think about it. The fact that you think you can even just leave is a sign of
It's
privilege.
privilege.
But I will say they're waiting for an invitation. So many times that bubbled up in my research with, again, well-intentioned, good humans, white men that were my allies said, that's not for me. That's not something I don't want me. They don't want me there. I don't feel included there. I'm scared. I'm nervous. Like, I just want to stay out of the way. Like, of course, I believe in equality and equity and all the words, but I don't know what to say or do. So I'm going to get out of here. But
Let me ask
when
a
I have
question about that.
facilitated,
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
no, no, it's okay. I was going to say the thing that I have found, because people will say DEI training doesn't work, allyship programs don't work. Well, we measure the effectiveness of our programs. And when we had a women's ERG event, for example, or a pride event, or, fill it in, an allyship event, a program, a series of intentional, consistent actions. And we had a meaningful invitation for men or straight people or folks that were not disabled talking about disabilities. When they were purposely invited to come and be supportive, the chances of success of that program nearly doubled. And so they need a deliberate invitation. Otherwise, they're going to think it's not for them.
Well, my question was going to be, who's supposed to issue that invitation? If depending on where the power is, we can do it on a individual basis. Like I said, the allies that are in your network, you can. But when you start going up the food chain and you get to the people who have the most power, who the hell's supposed to invite them? I mean,
That's the annoying part, right? Gosh, gotta do more work. If I think about the lion's share of our work has fallen on women of color. It just has, right? In the early days, I've been doing DEI work for 10 years, but in the early days of, George Floyd's murder and just people just coming out of the woodwork doing DEI, like, Julie, you're white. You can't do DEI. Like, well, I've been doing it for 5 years.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm pretty sure I know I'm white. Like, we should be talking about this too. Why does this burden keep falling on people of color, especially women? That's not fair. And so I just want to say, I totally disagree that this burden and that work emotional labor should continue to unfairly fall on women of color. But I do think I do think that if you have an inclusive mindset, regardless of your race, your gender, your abilities, you know, everything, all your identities. If you really just think like inclusion's a really good thing, and I want inclusion I want people to feel included, I want people to feel seen, I want them to feel heard, and I want them to feel a sense of belonging at work, at home, all the places. Speak up. Use your freaking voice. Like, what are you afraid of? There are so many people that are choosing cowardice over courage right now. And we need everyone speaking up. But that invitation, I think, ideally, if I had a magic wand, it would be the C suite. It would be the senior most leader inside a company in a corporate context saying, hey, this is really important. I'm serious about this and I want you to show up. Because, what I've seen is attendance dwindle for my programs. Starts off strong, and then month 5, we got like half the people coming. Why? Well, when you're incentivized based on work, air quotes here, getting done, emails getting answered, projects getting completed, work getting done, productivity, quality, whatever it is. When that's what you're being rewarded to, and not helping out with an employee resource group or being rated as inclusive in your performance review, you're going to focus on what gives you a reward.
For sure.
Humans are built to base their behavior on what's rewarded. And sadly, this behavior is not being rewarded.
Well, and then so to, sort of to wrap up a little bit the what's next thing. Will the quiet approach? I mean, right now because of the backlash, people are kind of just like not really talking about it, which if you're standing on the sidelines and you don't feel like you've been invited into the conversation, and then people stop having the conversation, that doesn't bring you in. So if we know that right now people are just being quiet, they believe through pragmatism, is that going to still work? Or are companies going to have to come away from that?
That's a really interesting question. What will it take to get the conversation started again?
I have an opinion, but
I I have an opinion too. Well, we know what happened with Me Too and Black Lives Matter. So if there's any indication from the past, it usually takes something horrible happening for people to care. And I don't want that to happen. I really don't, but I think that's what it's going to take. We need some sort of human moment around this, another reckoning, if you will. This isn't okay. Like, it's not okay. The status quo is not safe. We cannot. And this is the thing about human behavior, too. A lot of my friends in DEI that have survived the storm have pivoted to change management work. And DEI was always change management work, right? So that's smart. But with change, as human beings, we like to keep things the same because we've been alive and we don't die and things stay the same. Our brain works that way with change, grieves it, it overvalues loss versus gain. And so, kind of reorienting in that is, what do we have to lose by staying the same? And what do we have to gain by embracing this change? And if you can kind of work through that kind of grieving process that we naturally go through with change, you can get people to understand that just because it's working right now doesn't mean that this is acceptable for the future.
and I'm fearing really that what happened before that got people motivated and pushed out did not happen in an environment like this where the pushback was. There was always pushback. Whenever we go forward, there's pushback. But we were not in an environment where there was active silencing. So I worry as to whether or not that's even going to work now.
Yeah.
Because if it happens, even if you say something, there's an active effort to shut that down.
Yeah. Yep. I worry about that too. There are certain people that if their voices get quieted, I am going to be alarmed and very concerned. I've been following people that are very outspoken right now and just hoping they keep using their voices because you're right. There is retribution now for speaking out. However, also going back to, the two latest social movements, Me Too and Black Lives Matter. Trump was president during the height of both of those. So we have risen to the occasion before. Now, this is next level what's happening right now. And I work at a university, so I know what's happening hands on. I'm having to publicly post my syllabus and I'm having to scrub words out of things. It's ridiculous what's happening with the silencing. However, there are so many more of us than them. Most of the research shows about 10% naysayers with DEI. 10% that's like, I don't want this, it's bad, which is weird. That's a big number. But that means 90% are persuadable or are all in on this. There's way more of us. And this is intentional what he's doing. What this administration is doing is trying to convince us that there's way more of these naysayers. There isn't. They're just way louder and unfortunately overrepresented in positions of power and influence and have more resources than everyday people. So we just need to really think about what's real and what we're being led to believe.
So that's a practical perspective. So let's kind of shift the conversation to, all right, so what can we do right now? Given where we are, what can leaders themselves do to maybe turn that dynamic around, to touch that 90%? And what can those of us who aren't necessarily in the power position do to get those people who are in the power position to, like you said, to sway that 90%? How do we do that? What do we do right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So I organized the research for my new book in kind of three sections. So I've already talked about like the individual pieces, overcoming the fears, understanding your sources of power, what's in it for you, because you have to have a benefit to, you have to have a strong why to stay in this work. You're just going to go up and down with the news cycle if you don't have strong conviction behind it. The next thing that you do is you think about it at a team level. So, what does that mean in a team? What role do you want to play as an ally? So, usually when I ask people in a room, like who wants to be helpful, supportive of folks that are different from themselves, 90% of the hands go up. But then they're like, but Julie, I don't know how to do it. Tell me what to do. It's like, well, I can't, I can't tell you which I could, but you're probably not going to do it. It's like asking a kid to do the dishes, you know? They're not going to want to do it. They came up with the idea, you know, far more committed, right? Same thing goes for allyship. It's a choose your own adventure approach. There's different roles I have found that allies can play over the years. And, you know, it could be a mentor, a sponsor, an advocate, a coach, a challenger. Those are the primary five that I use as kind of an umbrella. And of course, there's way more you could pack in there. I say sponsorship. Like if you really want to be like a really powerful ally, sponsor somebody that's different for you. Put some career collateral on the line for a high potential employee in your organization that you see as a superstar but is being overlooked because of something they can't even control about their identity. That's a big, big deal. And most people are not doing that. So know your role, know your lane, double down, intentionally diversify who you're spending time with, diversify your content sources, use stories. I mentioned facts and data before, that's great. But when you pair facts and stories with stories, stories stick in our brains much more, like 20 times more than facts and figures. Have good story sharing. We know when leaders tell stories of, hey, there's this time I was mentored by somebody, or this was this time when this happened, and here's the feedback I got, and here's how I made it better for somebody. Those stories stick, and that's modeling. So a lot of times people say, well, just model for other people, and modeling is a great teacher. But the research on this actually shows modeling paired with storytelling is going to be far more impactful. So not only do you do it, but then you tell a story so someone can see themselves in your story, because they may see you do it and like that works for Brad, but that's not going to work for me. So storytelling, and then I talk about some of the non-sexier parts of DEI, like inclusive policies and proactive pipeline building, and really tactical stuff. Which the last thing
That
I'll
stuff
say
is also sexy, let's be clear. I love that part of all this.
it's not easy. It's not easy. But we've known that we should be doing these things for a real long time,
Right.
and somehow people put it together. Measuring the impact. What is the business problem we're trying to solve? Like all these things are so important, but organizations don't do it. Here's what I'm finding, though, which is really interesting with all of the pushback that we're experiencing. Public proclamations have gone away, busy work has gone away, all these, unnecessary or I would say inefficient
Social media
training.
posts.
Yeah.
Yeah, not so much. But what are they doing instead? They're doing these behind the scenes things. I'm hearing from a lot of leaders like, oh, yeah, we went through our whole employee experience and we're debiasing the hiring process. We're working with hiring managers on how to be inclusive. So these things that are happening behind the scenes have always been more impactful than these public proclamations. So I'm actually really intrigued, and that's long game work. So we're not going to see the benefits of that immediately like we did with some of the performative work. So again, 2030, if I were looking ahead, I think 2030 is like there is a reckoning that happens. Your workforce is diverse. Diversity is a fact. We're not getting rid of diversity in our country. It's just not possible. Inclusion is the only path forward. And so there's going to be winners and losers with this. And if you wait too long, you will be on the losing side.
It's a choice. And Julie, one of the things that I would love for you to talk a little bit about is you were talking about sponsorship and kind of the impact that can have. I've also heard you talk a bit about the difference between kind of power with and power over. And so I would love for you to kind of pull that apart for folks, because I think there are forms of sponsorship where it is, I will take you to my circles and introduce you to people, but I am your only gateway to any future. And then there is what you refer to as kind of power with. So could you kind of separate those and help folks understand the difference?
Yeah. That has been the most positive feedback I've gotten about the book, is power with versus power over. And to use the word Janet that used earlier, centering, power over is recentering yourself in the narrative. It's, hey, yeah, I'm going to go to that meeting with you and I'll make the introduction and then we'll have lunch and I'll keep managing this relationship for you. When you don't need me to do that, you need me to make the introduction and get the heck out of the way. That's a power with approach. What's interesting about power, and Simon Sinek has this in his latest book about it's an infinite game. Power is not finite. So if I share my power with you, it actually grows. Now, if I try to hoard my power, then it stays like contained within me and it might feel really good. You might have a lot of control over that. But when you share it with somebody, you amplify yourself in the process. And that's not why you want to do it, right? We don't want to do it for self-serving reasons. But it's because that person's going to grow and that relationship and tie to the other person's going to grow. And there will be a natural reciprocal effect where you will feel those benefits intrinsically back. If nothing else, just being helpful and valued to another human being, because we're a social species. We're meant to be in community with each other. We want to feel valued and important for our own survival because we can't survive on our own. Yeah. Isolation is really harmful. And so power with is really about leveraging your power for good, seeing power as a chance to be an ally, and then doing the thing and not making it about you in the process.
Let me to take that a little bit further, the example you gave of I'll take you in and then I will walk away. But if I'm an underrepresented person, if I'm a person who has not been in those spaces and I've never been in those rooms before, I love what you said about you step back, but you manage it. You don't walk away. You just step back. And did I understand that's what you're saying? Because I'd be afraid that, you throw somebody in a space and then you walk away. And if they weren't in that space before and you're not using your power to make sure that that's been valuable, it might just go away.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. So read the room. You might need to linger a little bit. I usually see allies overstay their welcome. So that's why I said that, Janet. It's like, hey, I remember a really great, well-intentioned ally. He just wanted to do everything for me. And it came from a really good place. And we know the difference between intentions and impact in our work, right? Great intentions, not such a great impact. Feel it out. Like, know, one of my favorite ally phrases that one of my coaches taught me is, what does support look like for you? And you don't know. Don't presume. It's not the golden rule. Treat people how you want to be treated. It's the platinum rule, right? Treat people how they want to be treated. Especially if somebody's from a historically marginalized group that you're not a part of, you don't know what support looks like for them. Support could be very different for them than it is for you. So don't presume you know what allyship techniques are going to be helpful or strategies are going to be helpful. Ask. And really show that you care when you ask that question. Let it linger, let someone process that, maybe reflect and give them time and space to think about it. Because sometimes, especially you've been overlooked your whole career, there's an imposter syndrome that kicks in. And it's not because women or people of color are inherently less confident. That's ridiculous. It's because you're getting all these cues that this is not built for me, that this isn't for me, as your body is viscerally reacting to a non-inclusive environment and thinking you don't belong, which is all the signals that you're being taught. And so think about, what does support look like for that person?
And Julie, I've heard you talk before about three words that jump out to me that I've heard you describe: intentional, consistent, and curious. And that's what I hear when you're talking about being a sponsor. And Janet, to your point of don't assume that they want you to leave, because there are times I've been in that room and I'm like, please don't go anywhere. You need to introduce me to people. I don't remember anybody's name. I don't know who does what. If you leave me here, I'm just going to sit in the corner and grab a drink and not talk to anybody. And then there are the other times, Julie, to your point, that you're like, I got this. I want to talk to them. And if you're still here, they're looking at you because you are 3 levels above me. So asking those questions questions in advance. Hey, we're going to this thing together. What does good look like to you? What do you want to accomplish? How can I support you? And then afterwards, hey, are you good here? I'm going to get out of here. No, 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 stay. And then after the event is over, how did that go? What worked well? And so when you talk about intentional and consistent, I hear that same thing when I hear you talking about storytelling, because it is taking the modeling of behaviors and making it explicit, right? It's saying, you didn't just accidentally see me do these things, or I didn't just do them because they're natural. This is why I did them. And I feel like that is such a key to unlocking some of this conversation, is intentionally including people and reaching out to that CEO that's like, the disabled community doesn't want me in there. They want to just have their own conversation. And you're like, no, of course we want you in here. There's this disconnect that is being bred with a lack of communication, a lack of intentionality, a lack of consistency. So that CEO is the same one that's like, go to these sessions that Julie's doing. Then they're like, all right, everybody's going to go. And they don't know that people started dropping off at month 2, 3, 4, 5 because there were competing priorities. So I love kind of the intention, the consistency, the curiosity, because it really does bolster all these wonderful things that you're talking about.
And can I add that the word that stuck out with me, what you just said, was that thing about consistency? Because I'll go back to, if you're the person in power and you do something and then walk away, you're not using it feels to me like you're not using your power to its fullest, because you can make people, the one thing we always talk about with allyship and DEI is accountability. And if you have power, you can make other people accountable. So that walking out of the room is one thing. You walk out of the room, but you don't walk out of that relationship. We talk about power with, what that comes up for me is parallel paths here. You're not, I'm not going to walk away. I'm watching. I'm watching the people that I've put you in front of. I'm watching the path that I've helped you get onto, and I'm going to stay there. That to me sounds like sponsorship, where you pay attention all the time.
Yep, staying engaged. And then, Julie, just really quickly, and I want you to react to anything because there's a lot going on here, but I feel like sometimes we talk about power as if it's a binary, that there are some people that have it and some people that don't. But I feel like I've heard you say, we've been at the center of movements. Whether it is, I'm an ERG leader, and so I have 1,000 people that read my emails, or I'm a CEO, or I am the person that manages the budgets. Like, power feels very dynamic, and I think sometimes when it's talked about as a have it or don't, it feeds into that zero sum of, if I give you more, then that means I have less. But in the social connection space, you're saying like, no, it just grows. If you are sponsoring different people and they're meeting others and they're bringing you in, that is almost infinite. But I feel like in some instances, power is talked about almost like it's water. And it's like, no, there's a limited amount. And we're in this, post-apocalyptic dystopian, I need my drink so nobody else can have any.
Yeah. 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 It's that it really is an unhelpful narrative we have around power. And I don't know, this would be interesting research to know how that narrative is formed. Probably in our childhood, there's only so much. There's a scarcity mentality. And so we absorb these cultural messages. And it's not helpful when we get to the workplace and realize that power can grow power and there isn't a finite source of it. It is really interesting, Janet, something that you said back to the whole leave the room thing, which I think is really interesting. Y'all brought up a really good perspective on this. It reminds me of a story that I found in my research 8 years ago when I first wrote my first book about allyship and specifically around gender, that one of the allies, one of the things that he would do for a woman he was mentoring and sponsoring too, is he would go to the meeting and put his coffee cup down. Then he'd leave and she would sit by the coffee cup. And people paid attention to her and were like, oh, shoot, like she's basically acting on his behalf. But he wasn't even there.
Wow. A
And
coffee
so
cup. Wow.
thinking about proxies to power, like to your point, it's not, and power, I think the other thing that people misunderstand is they think it's like identity based, right? It's all like privileged identities. That does give you, people listen to you differently. People listen to me differently when I'm white talking about racism, especially if you're not a part of that group, right? And that's a chance to be an ally, of course. But social influence, who do you know? What proxies to power do you have? What are your coffee cup moments? I mean, just thinking about that, everyone has power. And this was a huge misunderstanding of people with power. They don't think that they have the power. Even if they I interviewed C-suite types. I'm like, well, what can I do? And it's like,
Yeah, who am I? Nobody listens to me. And you're like, are you kidding?
You're
Everyone
the
is looking to you to
CEO.
see what to do. Yeah, no, I've seen the same thing. Folks that are like, well, but when I just get one level higher, then I'll have decision-making authority. And these are VPs and senior VPs and even the CEO sometimes. Well, the board is the one with power, or the politicians are the ones with power. And so sometimes it feels like a defense mechanism to say, don't look to me, look to everybody else. But in a lot of these instances, again, when I've trusted the people that it's coming from and trusted their narrative, it does feel like, who am I? I'm just Khalil. I'm just this person. And other people are looking and saying, no, I am looking to you, and others are as well. So I think helping people understand their sources of power is incredibly valuable also.
And something
yeah,
else that to take on, what you just said, it seems to me that you talked about storytelling, and we talked about, the stories we tell. As a Black woman who, by the function of this of society, I'm sort of at the bottom of the food chain on this one. I can tell stories, but I think there's a heck of a lot more power with you as a white woman telling stories. So the question is, who tells the stories to whom? So when I hear that idea of consistency and power, to me, there's a whole lot of power in people who aren't me having those conversations, telling those stories, doing the invitation in. Because of course, white men in power probably assume that I want them there and they don't feel welcome. And yes, I can invite them, but it's also good if somebody who's a rung closer to them on that social hierarchy says, no, 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 no. I'm here and I want you to be here too. So when we talk about who can do it and where you can do it and having power from the seat you're in, there's a whole lot of power, I think, in people inviting other folks in who aren't the people that are normally inviting them in. I'm not saying that very well, but that's what came up for me from what you said.
yeah, yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. Well, and here's the danger with storytelling, especially of historically marginalized groups. It can be re-traumatizing. If you're telling a story about a microaggression, there are stories I finally found the courage to write about in the book. A time when a CEO looked me in the face and said he had trouble promoting women in the childbearing years. That was something I was so embarrassed and ashamed about, even though he was 100% in the wrong. So there's something that you have to be careful with your energy and how you tell stories that are painful so that you don't trigger those feelings of shame or, in that case, just extreme disappointment, quite frankly, corporate America. And that was the beginning of the end for me in corporate America.
You're like, I'm out. Thank you so
Like,
much.
no, thank you. And it was just so embarrassing. The whole thing was just really poorly managed and very embarrassing. All that to say, you're right, Janet, that we need the people with power sharing their stories. We need them talking about a time when I felt vulnerable, a time when I went through something tough, a time when I wanted to help somebody and I didn't know how. These types of stories are incredibly powerful because, again, you're modeling those behaviors while also wrapping it in a container of a story that's going to be very memorable for somebody else. The problem is that we have the exact opposite style of leadership leading our country right now. So it has given free permission for a lot of bad, unvulnerable, non empathetic behavior. And so I worry. There was an article that came out recently that talked about how empathy is really leaving the workplace, and that kind of we're going back to like 1980s, like chain of command style of leadership because, again, who's leading our country? I worry about that. And so, if that feels, I suspect most C suite types don't really want to lead that way. I think people lead that way from a place of insecurity. And so, if you don't want to lead that way, or that feels like a little to you, hey, what's this time when you didn't feel included? What's a time when you wanted to be helpful and you didn't know how? Channel a story and just tell somebody, anybody in the company, ideally everybody, but start somewhere with your story. And once you see that it's hopefully psychologically safe to do so, that's something you also have to pay attention to. Once you do that, you create permission for everybody else to jump in. And we just need to see more of that modeled right now.
Well, as a speechwriter, that's one of the things that when I work with especially C-level folks, one of the biggest fights I usually have, because it's uncomfortable, is to say, I need to understand what your experience was in this space. And like if I have a CEO, a white male CEO who's going to talk to, for example, a Latino group or women's group or a black group, and I've heard them say, I don't really have an experience. I'm like, oh, you do. And my job is to help you say it and to make you feel comfortable saying it, because you don't understand the power of you doing that. And, I always say that we have to lead from the spaces we're in. And I do think that that's one of those spaces where those of us who are even connected to power, that's how we invite people in. I think sometimes we have to encourage them to be vulnerable and to say, yeah, I know it's scary, but you really need to do it, and help them understand the power of doing it. Because I don't think they do understand the power of doing that.
No. When you've been swimming in the water and everything's working for you, you don't think that the water is different for somebody else and it's not working for them. You just don't see it because it hasn't happened to you. And that's what allies do, as they look around. I call it kind of keep your radar up. Shoot, I did see that interruption. Oh gosh, someone did take credit for their idea. My gosh, they weren't even included in the social outing. Good allies are paying attention to those micro behaviors and realizing that if we let those behaviors continue, if we let them persist, more of them will happen. And if you're not okay with that, you got to say or do something differently.
Right.
Standing on the sidelines, like so many people are doing right now, thinking that this will just all go away, it'll go back to normal eventually. That's being really not helpful at all. That is harmful behavior if we continue to let that continue. I have
Avoidance
to
is not
share.
a strategy.
No, right. Hope is not a strategy either.
Exactly.
And it's uncomfortable. I think it's uncomfortable to admit that we're in real trouble. Like the train has left the station, and if we don't rein this in, we could do so much damage and so many people could get hurt. And that's honestly what keeps me up at night. Complacency, the lack of courage. And we the more people with power that can model the opposite of that. I think about a great example right now, Gavin Newsom. I'm not getting political, but I just love that. I mean,
I
if
do
we
too.
had more of that, that would be amazing. But he, by modeling that, is creating permission and giving other people the nudge, I think, to be like, oh, shoot, maybe I should speak up more too. So if you don't think you have a voice or your voice doesn't matter, you're probably wrong. And I would challenge you to think about, what do you care about? How can you advocate for that? How can you use your voice for positive change? Because being silent is not, like you said, a strategy.
How do you help them find a personal why? You talked about the why. How do you help somebody do that?
Yeah, yeah, it's one of my favorite exercises to do. So I've done this hundreds of times with leaders and allyship programs, and I really think about the answer to this question within the context of allyship and the I and DEI of inclusion. Think about, why does this matter to me? Like, okay, if you're a business leader, it's a huge business case. I think everyone knows that or should know that by now. Higher innovation, revenue rates, profitability. Literally every team performance measure is higher with diversity. I don't even want to belabor that point. You should know that by now. Not to be condescending. If you don't know that, McKinsey has great data.
As does Harvard Business Review, as does MIT, as does Yale, as does Deloitte, as
Ask
does
us. We can tell you.
enter any organization you want. Any credible organization has studied this and found the same thing.
Yeah. The only downside is decisions can take longer. And I'm
For
teaching a
sure.
decision making class at university, and it's the first thing I'll admit. Yeah, they take longer, but they're way better. So it's a quality over quantity thing. So business case, that's fine. But that actually doesn't really work. And that's why I think progress has been stagnant, even though that business case has been around for decades. It's the human case that we're missing. So, what is the cost of exclusion to you? What does it mean to you to work in an environment where people don't feel seen, where they don't feel heard, where they don't feel a sense of belonging? What does that cost you personally? What does that mean to you? What if nothing changes? Are you going to be okay with that? And so, really dialing back on your own personal values, your personal relationships. A lot of allies told me, and this used to make me cringe, it's like, I have a daughter. Okay, come on in. Like, if that's your entry point, who cares? A mom, a partner, whatever. If that's what it made for you to care and for it to hit home and impact you directly,
We'll take it.
let's, that's an invitation. Come on, I'll take it. Let's not be judgy about why someone got there. For me, I usually share my personal ally why, and I have three daughters. They are white, they are cisgender, they are able bodied, they have a lot of dimensions of privilege. and their identities. But there's a lot more to them. My 4-year-old has autism. We have mental health, anxiety, LGBTQ+, a lot of things that you can't see that go beyond. And so I personally do this work and show up, especially when it's hard, when this has been the worst year in operating a business in 10 years. I keep showing up because I care about them and their future, and fairness and justice are really core values to me. And so I'm not going to ride the wave of a news cycle. I'm not going to not do this work because it's not profitable anymore. It's important. It's important to them. And those are the most important people in my life. So you got to make it like that personal, honestly. Like you need to cut that, like get in your heart, because otherwise, complacency, lack of courage, you're not going to show up when we need you if you don't have a strong why.
Well, I feel like that is a perfect place to let you go off and continue to do this incredible work. Julie, thank you so much for the time, for the work that you're doing, for the books that you're writing, for the organizations that you're partnering with, and for the insight that you've provided in this conversation. Really, really appreciate your time and all of the contributions that you've made to this discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on In This Moment. Find today's resources at inthismoment.network and connect with us on LinkedIn. And if this was valuable, subscribe and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. It helps other leaders find us. Stay ready for what's next.